The rain came in sideways that afternoon. I remember sitting in the back of that small church, listening to it hit the windows in waves. My suit was damp at the shoulders. My shoes had water in them. I had not planned to come here. I had not planned a lot of things lately. I pressed my hands flat on my knees and looked at the floor. There is a small mark in the wood near the front of the room. A dark groove, maybe from a chair leg, maybe from something else. I kept looking at it. I could not stop looking at it. My knees still hurt. Not from the cold, not from the walk here. They hurt because of what happened in this room, because of what happened to me right there, in front of people I had come here to embarrass. I sat in that quiet church for a long time before I could breathe normally. The rain kept coming. The wooden benches creaked a little in the cold. A candle near the front wall had been left burning, and the flame moved every time the wind found a gap somewhere in the old building. I want to tell you something, and I need you to stay with me while I do. I have told pieces of this story before. To one man I trust, to no one else. I have never said the whole thing out loud from beginning to end, so if you are watching this, I am asking you to stay. Not because I need an audience, because some things are too heavy to carry into an empty room. If you are here, I need you to keep watching. What I am about to tell you matters. And it did not happen the way I expected my life to go. My name is Faisal Al-Harbi. I come from a family in Saudi Arabia that has had influence for a long time. My father was an advisor to people in government. His father before him was the same. I grew up believing that our family name was something you wore like armor. It meant things opened for you, doors, conversations, rooms full of people who would rather agree with you than argue. I came to Australia for business, import agreements, government contracts, meetings in glass buildings where everyone had a firm handshake and a soft voice. I had been there many times. I spoke English well. I understood how Australians moved through a room, how they softened everything, how they said she'll be right when they meant something much harder than that. I was 43 years old. I had money, influence, and the certainty that the world operated according to a set of rules that I understood better than most people around me. I did not know yet how completely I was about to be taken apart, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, to the first moment this whole thing started. It began outside a community event in a suburb I no longer remember the name of. One of those evening gatherings where businesses and local organizations put up tables and hand out brochures and stand around with cups of tea pretending the networking is incidental. I had gone because one of my Australian contacts suggested it, not because I expected anything useful. These events rarely were. I was standing near a row of tables when I noticed a man about 30 years old, tall, with a quiet way of standing that irritated me before he had even opened his mouth. He had a small card table with some printed materials on it, a Bible verse on a laminated sheet, a few folded pamphlets. He was talking to a woman nearby, and the way he spoke about Jesus, calmly, without any embarrassment, did something to me that I did not like. I am not going to dress it up. I walked over because I wanted to knock him down, not physically. I did not do things that way. But I had spent enough time in rooms with powerful men to know that words can do more damage than fists, and I had been trained since boyhood to use them precisely. He smiled when I approached. His name was Daniel. He had a slight Australian accent, the kind from somewhere regional, and he held out his hand to shake mine before I had said a word. I did not reach for it straight away. I looked at his materials first. I said, "You believe in this?" He said, "Yes." I said, "You understand what you are claiming. A man who died and came back. A man who was God. You believe this is factual?" He said he did. I began. I will not pretend I was gentle. I pressed him on the historical record. I asked him how he reconciled his belief with the Islamic understanding of Jesus, with the Jewish understanding, with the accounts that conflicted. I listed things he had probably not thought about. I watched his face for the moment it shifted. It came about 4 minutes in. He hesitated. Just a fraction, just a small pause where he searched for the next word and could not find it immediately. I found that pause very satisfying. I said something like, "You see, you have not thought this through enough to defend it." He recovered. He said something quiet in response. something about faith not requiring a debate win, but I had what I came for. I walked away before he could finish. That small victory sat warm in my chest for the rest of the evening, and the warm feeling made me want it again. Like something that had always been there but had only just found the right shape. I did not know that Daniel would be one of the people I would later call, that in the months after the church I would sit in a hotel room and dial his number and not know what to say when he answered. That he would say it was fine, that he would mean it, but that was later. A few weeks after the encounter in the church, and I know that jumps ahead, but the weeks after were their own thing, and I want to stay with them for a moment. I was back in Australia for a different meeting. The meeting went fine. I was functional. I wore the right things and said the right things, and the man across the table from me was satisfied. But when I returned to the hotel, I did not feel the way I usually felt after a good meeting. I felt nothing. A strange, flat nothing. That evening I found myself in a part of the city I did not usually walk through. I had taken a longer route back without meaning to. There was a church on the corner. Small, stone, old by Australian standards. The door was open. I stood outside for a moment. Then I went in. I did not speak to anyone. There was a woman arranging flowers near the side wall and an older man in the front pew who did not look up. I sat in the very back row, pressed against the far end of the bench, and I looked at the room. I could not have told you why I was there. I want to be clear. I had spent years believing that entering a church was something a man like me did not do. It felt like a concession, like stepping into someone else's territory and admitting they had something you didn't. That was how I had always framed it to myself. But I sat there, and I looked at the wooden ceiling, and I said nothing. On the walk back to the hotel, I thought about Daniel and the look on his face when I pressed him at the community table. I thought I should feel satisfied. Instead, I felt something closer to irritation, not at him. At myself, although I could not say exactly why. I pushed the thought down. I was good at that. Months before the community event, because that is how memory works, it does not always move in straight lines. I had been at the university where one of my business contacts lectured part-time. I was waiting for him in the corridor outside his office when I heard a small group of students in an open common room nearby. One of them was speaking about Jesus. He was young, maybe 20, with the kind of earnest face that made me think he had never had a serious conversation in his life. He was not preaching exactly. He was just talking to his friends with his hands moving and his voice full of something I recognized immediately as certainty. I had done my research by this point. After the night with Daniel, I had gone back to my room and read things. Arguments, specific points of contradiction. I prepared the way I would prepare for a business negotiation. Objectives, weak points, what I needed to say to shift the room. I waited until there was a pause in their conversation. Then I approached and introduced myself. I did not explain why I was there. I simply said I had overheard them and found the topic interesting. The young man, whose name I learned was Tom, looked pleased. He thought I was curious. I was not curious. I was loaded. I asked him about the gospel accounts and why they contradicted each other on specific details. I watched him reach for answers. I asked him about the historical silence around the resurrection in non-Christian sources from the 1st century. I watched his friends go quiet. I asked him about the manuscript tradition and what he thought about the gaps. He got flustered. He started a sentence and reversed it. One of his friends tried to help, and I turned the same pressure on her briefly, and she stepped back. Tom looked down at the table for a moment. His hands were flat on the surface. He took a breath. He said he did not have a perfect answer for every question I had raised, but that his faith was not built on having all the answers. I told him that was a convenient position. I did not say it kindly. I said it the way you say something when you want the other person to feel the weight of their own uncertainty, and it landed. I could see it land. I walked away before they had a chance to regroup. I stood in the corridor outside my contact's office for a few minutes, waiting, and I looked at the wall in front of me. Good. That was good. I had handled that cleanly. No loose ends. Then I went outside to find my car, and as I crossed the small courtyard near the entrance, I saw Tom. He was not looking at me. He had not followed me. He was crouched beside an elderly woman who had dropped a bag near the bottom of the steps. Her groceries had gone in several directions. Tom was collecting them quietly, one at a time, while she stood there. He said something to her that made her laugh, a small laugh. Then he handed her the bag and stood up and walked back inside without looking around to see if anyone had noticed. He had not seen me watching. I stood there for a moment longer than I meant to. Then I got in my car and drove. In the weeks that followed, I began noticing small changes in myself that I did not look at directly. The way you notice something in your peripheral vision and turn your head and it is gone. I answered my staff differently, not dramatically. But one morning a young woman on my team delivered a report with an error that cost us a renegotiation. In the past, I would have made sure she understood exactly what her mistake had cost in a way she would not forget. That morning I corrected the figures, told her to resend the document, and moved on. She looked at me like she was waiting for something more. I did not give it to her. One night in my hotel room in Sydney, I tried to pray, not from habit, from something else I could not name. I sat on the floor, which I had not done in years, and I tried to find the stillness I had been taught a man finds in prayer. It did not come. The room felt the same after as it did before. I became frustrated, then angry. I stood up and moved to the window. On the desk there was a small wooden cross. The hotel had a display of local artisan pieces, and that was one of them. I had mocked it earlier in the week when my business partner had been in the room, called it decor for people who needed comfort they could buy. That night I stood at the window and I could not stop looking at it. I went to bed without touching it. But I lay awake for a long time. The third confrontation was deliberate in a way the others had not been. I had heard about a pastor in the western suburbs of Sydney, older man, known in the local community, respected by people in his church, and reportedly very good at speaking about his faith in a way that drew people in. Someone who had been doing this for decades and was not easily rattled. I decided he was the right person. I found out about a discussion evening he hosted once a month. Open format. Questions welcome. I attended under the pretense of being interested in the community dialogue aspect. I wore a suit. I sat near the front. His name was Pastor William, broad through the shoulders, grey at the temples, and he had the kind of stillness when he stood at the front of the room that reminded me of certain government officials I had known, men who did not need to raise their voice to fill a space. He welcomed questions from the start. I let a few others go first. Then I raised my hand. I began by complimenting the format. Then I shifted. I asked him how he justified teaching something to his congregation that had been shaped by centuries of political and institutional influence. I asked him about the councils that had defined Christian doctrine, and whether he thought his congregation understood how many of the things they believed had been votes, not revelations. I raised my voice just enough that the people near me turned their heads. I pressed on the idea of the divinity of Jesus specifically. I did not frame it as a question this time. I made it a statement, and challenged him to disagree with it in a way that would hold up. Someone behind me shifted in their seat. The room had gone uncomfortable. Pastor William waited for me to finish. Then he looked at me. He did not look defensive. He did not look offended. He looked at me the way a doctor looks at a patient who is being difficult, not with impatience, but with a sadness that is separate from the behavior in front of them. He said something brief about the way the councils had worked, which was accurate and which undermined my point somewhat. But that was not the part that stayed with me. The part that stayed was the way he looked at me while he said it, like he could see something I had been careful to keep out of sight. I felt something rise in my chest, something sudden and hot that I immediately compressed. I sat back down. I crossed one leg over the other. I looked at the wall to his right. For the rest of the evening I said nothing. On the drive back to my hotel, I kept my eyes on the road, and I did not think about the way he had looked at me. I did not think about it at all. I thought about it the entire drive. After that evening things got quieter, not peaceful, quiet in the way a house is quiet when you can hear the pipes working in the walls. Something was happening below the surface and I was aware of it without wanting to look at it directly. I stopped going to the kinds of social gatherings I used to find useful. Dinners where you stand near the right person and let them see you. Evenings where your presence in the room is itself the message. I had built a significant part of my professional life around being visible in the right places. I started coming back to my room earlier. I did not read. I sat in the chair near the window and looked at the city lights and did not think about very much, which for me was unusual. I am a man who is always thinking about the next thing, the next meeting, the next conversation, the next move in a situation. That is how I was built. Silence felt like falling behind, but the silence came anyway. Then one afternoon, a property developer I had been working with said something dismissive about one of my advisors during a lunch meeting. It was the kind of comment that carried a small insult inside it, wrapped in a joke, designed so that if you called it out you looked thin-skinned. I had used the technique myself. I recognized it immediately. I looked at him across the table. I knew exactly what I could say to damage his position in the room. The words were already there, already formed, already aimed. I put my napkin on the table. I said I had another call to make. I shook his hand. I left the restaurant. I sat in my car outside, and I could not understand what I had just done. That was not me. I did not leave rooms like that. I did not walk away from the chance to correct someone who had come at me sideways. I defended my position. I made sure the cost was known. I started the car and pulled into traffic, and I felt something in my chest that was very close to relief. I did not know what to do with that. The morning before the Sunday service, I woke before my alarm. I had found out from someone in my network that Pastor William was holding a service at his small church that Sunday morning. I knew the address. I had been back to that address in my mind 100 times since the discussion evening. He had not beaten me, not technically, but the look on his face when he spoke to me had not left me, and something about that felt unfinished. I told myself I was going to end this, whatever this was. I was going to walk into that room and make clear, in front of his people, that the man standing at the front of it was not as certain as he appeared. I had fresh arguments. I had thought of better ones in the weeks since. I had been preparing without admitting to myself that I was preparing. I dressed carefully. Dark suit, good shoes, the kind of clothes that say something before you speak. I arrived after the service had started. I could hear singing as I pushed the door open. The congregation was not large, maybe 60 people in the wooden pews. Morning light came through the windows on the left side and lay in pale strips across the floor. I walked in, heads turned. I walked toward the front. Pastor William saw me and did not stop speaking. He was mid-sentence about something and he held the thread of it for a moment and then he paused. I stopped near the front pew and I said his name and I told him I thought the people in his church deserved to hear an honest conversation about whether what he was teaching them was actually true. The room went completely silent. I do not know exactly what I expected. Resistance, anger, something that would give me a surface to push against. Pastor William looked at me for a long moment. Then he said I was welcome to stay. That was all. He said I was welcome to stay. He did not argue. He did not call someone to remove me. He gestured toward the empty space on the nearest pew, and he said I was welcome to stay. And something about that answer sat wrong inside me in a way I had not expected. I had prepared for a door. He had given me an open one, and I did not know how to walk through it. I did not sit down. I stood there, in the front of that small Australian church with 60 people watching me, and I felt the arguments I had carried in begin to lose their shape, like something I had been holding at the right angle to catch the light, and the angle had shifted. The weeks after the service were different in their texture to anything that had come before. I am not going to overstate it. I did not become someone else overnight, but small things began to happen that I noticed because they were unlike me. I started making my own tea in the mornings. In the hotel room, the kettle, the cup, the simple business of it. I had always called down for things when I wanted them. It is not a significant thing, I know, but there is something about doing a small task with your own hands that changes the start of a day in a way you do not fully understand until you have done it. I called people I had not spoken to in years, not business calls, personal ones. A man I had worked alongside 15 years ago who had gone through something difficult, and I had not reached out during it. I called him. I did not explain why. He was surprised to hear from me. We spoke for 20 minutes about nothing much. I also began doing something that I kept private. I found a few situations where someone needed help, and I arranged for it anonymously. Money moved. Problems were addressed. I made sure my name was not attached to any of it. I returned to that church several times. I always sat in the back. Then one afternoon, someone came up to me outside the church and thanked me for something I had done without putting my name to it. I do not know how they connected it to me. I stood there and received the thanks, and I noticed that I did not feel the need to explain what I had done or expand on it or make sure they understood the full extent of it. I just said you're welcome. In the past, generosity was something I used. You gave something so you could point to the giving. This was different. I gave something and I had actually let go of it, and somehow the thanks felt more real because of that. Now I want to take you back inside that church. On the day I interrupted the service, because what I told you earlier about standing there with the arguments losing their shape, that is only the beginning of what happened. I was standing near the front pew. The congregation was very still. Pastor William had said I was welcome to stay. I had not sat down. I was trying to find the start of the next sentence, and it was not coming. I had not eaten that morning. I realized that suddenly. My mouth was dry. The light in the room was stronger than it should have been, or it felt that way. Something inside me had already been breaking before I walked through that door. I know that now. The walk away from the restaurant, the phone calls, the mornings with tea, the anonymous help. Something had been loosening for weeks, and I had not admitted it to myself. And walking into that church and watching my arguments lose their shape was the last of it. I was powerless. I had spent my entire adult life believing that I was never entirely powerless, that there was always a next move, always a way to control the shape of a room. And standing in that small Australian church with 60 people looking at me and a pastor who would not give me a door to push against, I had nothing. The room felt very quiet, and then it felt quieter still. Something changed in the air near the altar. I am going to try to describe this carefully because I have gone over it in my mind more times than I can count, and I know what it felt like and I cannot fully explain it, but I want to be accurate. The temperature shifted. Not dramatically, not like a door opening, more like the air in the room had a new weight to it, a density, like the moment before a storm when you can feel the pressure change in your ears. My arms felt heavy, the backs of my hands went cold. I heard nothing different. The church was still quiet, but I became aware, before I turned, before I saw anything, that something was present, not behind me, near the altar. Something was near the altar. I turned. He was standing there. I will not try to describe what I saw in a way that sounds composed, because I was not composed. My mind went ahead of itself and then behind itself and then both at once. I am a man who has met prime ministers and senior members of several royal families and people whose names are in history books, and I have never been unable to function in those rooms. I have always been able to function. I could not function. I will tell you what I could see clearly. The room. The altar, the morning light still lying in strips across the floor, the small wooden cross on the wall to the left, and him standing there, his face. I cannot. Every time I try to describe his face, the description falls apart. Every other detail is sharp in my memory, the way he stood, the stillness of him, the fact that he was not looking past me or through me or at the room. He was looking at me. He did not speak immediately. The room around me had disappeared in the sense that I was no longer aware of the 60 people, the pews, the windows. It was only this, only him and me and the space between us, which was not large and was not small and felt like standing on the edge of something I had no language for. Then he spoke. He said very little. It was not a sermon. It was not a list of my failures or a verdict. It was one thing, specific, meant for me. He said I had been running from the truth because I was afraid to let go. That was it. Not exactly those words, but that was the shape of it. and it landed in a place inside me that I had not known was there, or that I had known was there and had built a very large structure on top of. My entire career had been built on control, the ability to walk into any room and manage the outcome. I had challenged Daniel and Tom and Pastor William because their certainty unsettled me, and the thing that unsettled me most was that I wanted it. I wanted what they had. And wanting something you cannot acquire through influence or money or argument was unbearable to me, so I had spent years trying to prove it was not worth wanting. He knew that. He said it in a way I could not argue with, and my knees went, not slowly, suddenly, like a chair with one leg removed. I was on the floor of that church, and I was not thinking about the 60 people, and I was not thinking about my suit, and I was not thinking about what this looked like. I was on the floor because I had run out of everything I had been standing on. I was crying. I am not a man who cries. I have cried twice in my adult life before this moment, and both times I was alone. But I was on the floor of a church in Australia in front of strangers, and I was crying in a way that did not care about any of that. Because the pride I had carried for years had just become unbearable weight, all at once, and it was coming out of me somewhere. I asked for forgiveness, not in my head, out loud, quietly, but out loud, for the way I had treated people, for the contempt I had moved through the world with, for Daniel, for Tom, for the woman I had dismissed without a thought 100 different times in 100 different ways, for all of it. When the presence was gone, I knew it was gone the way you know the sun has moved behind clouds. The temperature of the room returned to itself, and the air lost its weight, and I was on the floor of the church with my hands flat on the wood, and I was looking at a small dark mark in the floor. A groove in the wood just below where the front pew ended. I stared at it. The room had not moved. The congregation had not moved. I could hear someone near me saying something soft, and I did not take it in. I stayed on the floor for a while. My knees hurt. That is why my knees hurt now, sitting here in this empty church in the rain. I came back this afternoon because I needed to, not for anything dramatic. I am not the kind of man who needs rituals, but I needed to sit in this room with the memory of what happened in it and not be anywhere else for a while. The candle near the front wall is still burning. I leaned forward a little while ago and I touched the mark in the floor with one finger. Just briefly, just to know it was real. There are things in my life that are still not right. I carry shame for the way I treated people during those years. Not general, distant shame, specific shame. I can name the moments. I can name the people. Some of those people I will never be able to reach, and I have had to learn to put that somewhere and not let it crush me, which is a different kind of work than anything I was trained for. I am not a perfect man. I am not a converted man in the sense of someone who now has all the answers I spent years demanding from others. I do not have them. I am a man who met something real in this room and could not walk away from it unchanged. The life I live now looks different to the one I was living, not in the big visible ways. As I still work, I still fly between countries and sit in meeting rooms and make decisions, but I make them differently. I speak to my staff differently. I give without attaching my name to it, most of the time. And occasionally, when I feel the old pull of pride rising in a room, I notice it now. I notice it, and most of the time I let it pass. There is a man who walked into this room to stop a Sunday service, and there is a man who left it unable to stand. The distance between those two men is everything that happened in this story. I cannot explain the encounter to you in a way that will satisfy a rational mind. I could not explain it to my own rational mind when it happened. All I can tell you is what I experienced, and the only thing I have found in the years since that fits what I experienced is that it was real. Before I go, I want to ask you something, not about belief, not about religion. Just something simple. If there is something you are carrying right now, something heavy that you have been trying to manage on your own, something you brought into today that does not have a good answer yet, I want you to put it in the comments. Just write it down, whatever it is. The thing you are afraid of, the person you cannot forgive, the situation you cannot see the end of. Write it down and leave it there, because I will read it, and I will carry it, and I will pray for it in the way a man prays, when he no longer thinks prayer is beneath him. You do not have to believe the same things I believe. You do not have to explain yourself. Just leave it there, and know that someone who has been on the floor of this church will take it seriously. That is all I am asking. The rain is softer now. I am still sitting in the back row of this small church, and the candle near the front has burned down a little lower, and the wooden floor is exactly what it always was, except that I know what it feels like from the other side. That mark is still there. I will probably always come back to look at it.